and welcome to AWS Made Easy Ask Us Anything live stream. I think we are still waiting for Rahul to come. But yeah, welcome to the show. Welcome. Hope you had a really good New Year's, and we are back. Oh, there's Rahul. Hey, Rahul.
Hey, everyone. Happy New Year, and sorry I missed the first part of this.
It's only about 5 seconds.
But like everything good, it's good to start the new year with a little bit of a glitch in the hopes that the rest of the year goes well. I just got kicked out of this stream and took me a little bit to get back.
Oh, how's your year been? How's your New Year's?
Well, it's been a mixed bag. The start of the year has been pretty crazy and hectic. Not been a great time for the tech world with all the news around the layoffs. So our best wishes to everyone who is currently going through a tough time. We really hope you land on your feet. But yeah, it's been crazy. I think in general across the board, folks seem extremely concerned about the year ahead. Everyone's cautious because you don't know what the global economic scenario is going to look like. Huge focus on efficiency. We just wrapped up our budget cycle. And so, yeah, tightening up seems to be the mantra right now across the board, across all of tech.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I echo your sentiments. If anyone has been laid off, that's a really hard thing to go through, and you will land on your feet. Tech is resilient, but in the short term, that's a really rough thing to go through. So keep with it; it'll be okay.
And please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help in any way we can. If you're looking for an opportunity or something like that, just reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation at the very least. But yeah, we are there with you guys.
Absolutely. And what else did you do during your break, Rahul? I know it's crazy in tech.
So we had an amazing trip to Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up seeing some really amazing places, meeting some amazing people. And that's kind of one of the reasons I enjoy traveling. But yeah, it was absolutely amazing with the entire family. So there were 10 of us on this big long trip for 2 weeks or a week and a half. But it was pretty neat.
Wow.
What about you? How was your New Year's? And
I mean, New Year's was great. Most of the family was there except one, but it was really fun to just have everyone together. The kids really enjoyed the fireworks. And then I also spent a bit of time revamping the office.
I was about to call that out. You have an amazing background and an amazing new space. And I think that's what you promised as we wrapped up the year.
It was a really fun project over the break. Here, I'll switch to my studio cam here. So this
Fancy.
is over there. So then this is my studio camera. Got my coffee, my green notepad. This is my teleprompter window. This is my green screen, which we'll get into later for some fun effects. This is my main monitor here, and I've got a teleprompter right there, so that way I can look straight into it. It's been a lot of fun to set that up. I'll do a separate blog post on that, but it was in order to kind of document the setup. It's been really fun collaborating with the other live streamers in the community. For example, Darko, John Meyer. I'll put the setup on the screen here. So just to remember how it's all put together. Here we go. This is what it looks like. So on the video side, everything's coming into this little box called an ATEM. And then on the sound side, I've got this mixer. Then on the data side, just documenting the internet connection, even just documenting all the power and which brick goes to where. Because we have some really fun plans in store for this year in terms of doing a road show with CloudFix and doing different hackathons. And so I really wanted to make sure the setup was mobile and I could pack this up and then unpack it in a way that I could make sense of what's what. So
That's pretty awesome.
so really looking forward to that.
And I've
Um,
got some tips from you to redo some of my stuff over here, so I'm looking forward to it. Here, shipping stuff in India, especially if it has to be shipped from abroad, takes its own sweet time. So that's kind of something that I might have to wait another week or two to get some of those gadgets over here.
but I guess,
Okay.
but like cost optimization, there's an iterative process, right? We'll have reach one level and say, okay, this is what I was talking to Eric Wright about yesterday. Is okay, we've got to this level, and now I want that next feature that's in the next tier of gear. Being able to, yeah,
Yep.
having to manage all that.
But that sounds like a lot of fun. And you also made a trip to Portland, didn't you, for the
Yes,
FinOps
that was
meeting?
that was a blast. Not quite as exotic as Southeast Asia, but Southeast Pacific Northwest. But I'll put this on the board here. Let's put this on the screen. There we go. This is the FinOps Foundation. There's me right there. It's
I see GR over there. I see a bunch of familiar folks.
Yeah, it was
Um,
great. This was their kickoff Pacific Northwest chapter meeting, and yeah, it was great to spend an evening just talking about where we're all coming from, what we're all doing there, which is to understand. Well, Rahul, why don't you give us a summary of the FinOps Foundation in terms of what's its purpose? I mean, you're a governing member. I think you can summarize it better
yeah.
than I.
So I think we are in a very interesting world where a large number of enterprises have come in from a scenario where you basically had cost controls that were based on finance's capex model, where you bought servers up front, you know exactly what you were going to spend over the next 2-3 years. Finance had a model to amortize all of those expenses, and they had a model that worked. So there were guards and controls in place. Engineering did their own thing. They were limited or gated by whatever infrastructure was already bought. And then, of course, you had procurement that had a significant role to play in the purchase of all of that equipment. In today's world, you actually find that the roles across all of these parts of the organization have changed dramatically. Finance, given that everything has now become OPEX instead of CAPEX, where consumption of these resources are all on demand. So it becomes a little tricky to figure out what is the role of finance or how they control the total spend. The ability to forecast is very limited. And you basically have this big trade-off of innovating super fast and potentially spending a limitless amount of money. And so finance is constantly trying to figure out how to keep controls and tabs of what's going on. Engineering has a new role where now they need to manage finance as well. And that's not something that they were either trained to do or geared to do, or even engineering organizations don't even have the culture of trying to do that. And so that's a big change for engineering. And procurement is trying to find out where their new place is in the scheme of the org. Now, of course, there's a certain amount of financial engineering, is what I call it, where you have things like savings plans or enterprise discount programs or whatever with the cloud providers. But that's only a fraction of what they used to do earlier. So they have to find out what their role is now in this new world, where the cloud is really the enabler for innovation. The cloud is where everyone is moving to. And as organizations are trying to figure out how to navigate this scenario, and individuals are trying to figure out what it means for their career, their growth, and what they need to do, whether they be in engineering or finance or procurement or any of those roles. The FinOps Foundation basically helps everyone navigate through this with experience, use cases, case studies, and training brought in from all of these corners of people who have lived through it, people who have experience with it, and trying to bring it to a broader audience. So there's a lot of sharing of best practices. There's a lot of sharing of knowledge. There's a lot of very interesting insights that different stakeholders within the FinOps Foundation and from outside bring in to those conversations. So I think we are at the very early stages of developing something that looks like our, just like in finance, you have this, general accounting principles, or the standard way of actually doing accounting. We need something like that for our cloud costs and costs associated with it, which is so integrally tied to engineering. We don't have that, and to build that out in the long run, the FinOps Foundation is basically taking the steps to get there.
Well, I love how you're using this phrase engineering. There's this great phrase about bridge building. It says anyone can build a bridge that stands up, but it takes engineering to build a bridge which barely stands up.
Correct.
Right? With the idea of you could pile a bunch of bricks together and it would take 500 years, but you want to be able to say, how do I accomplish my tasks under constraints, where the constraints are financial, and this is a cost-oriented year for everyone. None of us are going to be above that, right? It used to be engineers didn't want to think about that. That was that was accounting's job. But no, we are all in together, because if we don't think about it, it affects the sustainability of our business models.
Exactly. And so the FinOps Foundation is doing an absolutely stunning job of creating a lot of the training material, creating a lot of content that individuals can leverage to figure out what the future looks like in the cloud world, where there are interesting roles, the new training that they need, both as engineers and as finance professionals and as operational professionals. There's tons of very, very interesting stuff that has been done and is yet to be done. I think we just scratched the surface so
far. I put a link into the comments, so definitely check that out. And then also, if you are in a transition time, one of the things that would be worth looking at is the FinOps certifications. They can go on LinkedIn, and you can look. That adds a lot of weight. So have a look at the FinOps certification, see if that's something that you want to spend some time brushing up on, if that's right for you. But that's definitely there, and they're putting a lot of resources and attention to make sure that's top quality.
Exactly.
All right. Let's see. Anything else?
Get started with the core of our show.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that sounds really good. And then let's jump right into it. All right. So the first article we want to talk about. Let's bring up our new transition. We're going to be talking about billing, cost management, and account console permissions. There we go.
Nice. This is the first time I'm seeing it as well. That looks pretty neat. Okay,
yeah.
So you want to bring that up on the screen?
Yes, absolutely. Let's do that here. Nope, not that one. Let me bring in.
It absolutely can be fun.
Here we go. This is the. Nope, not that. Sorry, I thought I had. It's billing conductor, not that one. This is.
As you can see, it's the start of the year, so we're just getting started. We are getting back into the groove.
Yeah, I see what I did. Here we go. This is the one. This is the changes to billing, cost management, and account console permissions.
Yep.
So this is a really interesting one. I'll put the URL in the chat in a moment. The key summary here is that AWS is retiring a set of IAM actions. So IAM actions, what are they? To get everyone on the same page, it's basically a thing that you can do. It's an operation that a user can perform on an AWS resource. So, for example, S3 list bucket. It's saying for a certain bucket, you can for the S3 service, you can list what's in the bucket.
Correct.
So this article, go ahead.
Yeah, and these very specifically were permission schemes that were only for the console. So it doesn't really affect folks who are using APIs. This is for people who granted access, say, to your finance team. If you were giving your finance team access to the console so they can download the bills, they can process them, they can look at the cost management part of it, the cost explorer, things like that. That's where this really will start impacting you pretty much right away.
So to summarize what's happening, they're getting rid of the AWS portal service prefix, so the entire set of permissions under those, plus these two other ones: the view purchase orders and modify purchase orders.
Correct.
And they give a really good justification for it in the fuller the announcement. And one of the things that they said, well, what do you think is the justification for it? I think one of them that they cited, they said, if you want to allow access to a specific cost management surface console page, but deny access to the bills page, you cannot do so today. So basically,
it was not the granularity, right?
Yeah,
of exactly, you don't get the kind of controls by, or the kind of controls that they got just in the console alone weren't enough, because they were either just enabling or disabling the portal, or enabling or disabling purchase orders. Everything else within it had no granularity of control. And this change allows them to go down a level further and give very specific access and controls to specific individuals. And I think that's completely valid.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a compliance aspect associated with it, or it will be in the future, in preparing for that world where certain people, certain named professions will have access to a certain set of information and not other.
I think for the most part, the people who were affected by this were the folks in, or the people who will be affected by this are the people in finance. They are not the kind of people who pull data out of, APIs and stuff like that. They are the ones who go into the console every month when the bill comes in. They download the bills, they look at the purchase orders, they push purchase orders into the system, and that's the kind of folks who are going to get affected by this change. So you need to act on this very quickly, because there are dates associated with how these impact, and these are not backward compatible. They are breaking changes. So you really have to be aware of it and take action right away if you have these permissions granted to your finance team.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives, in the article, there's a hard cutoff of July 6th. And it's an interesting transition. It says the AWS portal IAM actions will remain working until July 6th.
Yep.
But then after July 6th, AWS will remove these IAM actions for these managed policies.
Correct. And when I first read that, I actually was going to call out Werner Vogels, who famously in many of his keynotes has said APIs are forever. And I thought, this is the first time that AWS has introduced, or as far as I can remember, it's the first time that AWS has introduced a breaking change. But as I thought about it a little bit more, this doesn't change anything on the APIs. The APIs remain as is, but it does change stuff on the portal or the console only. So I think I can give them that little bit of leeway on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I was thinking about it. It would be really difficult for them to maintain two different views into the same thing that aren't at the same level of granularity. One of the things I cite in the new article, here I'll pull up this neat effect. This is the new granularity layers here. We've got consolidated billing, free tier, invoicing, and payments. And then within that, you're going to be able to have much more fine-grained access control.
Right.
So who's affected?
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I guess one thing that's interesting is that this is affecting people who are creating custom IAM policies with these embedded. If you're using a managed policy, it's just going to transition on its own.
Correct. And custom policies would typically be created when, say, you created a user for somebody in your finance team, and then you explicitly said, give them access to this portal with these permissions. Those are the only ones who are going to get affected by this. The rest should flow pretty seamlessly. Okay, so should we do a rating for this blog post? Well, so I think I'd give this a 4.5 clouds.
Put that up, 4.5 clouds.
Yeah.
And looking at the blog post, I mean, between the blog post and the guide, they are extremely thorough in making it very easy. They are not the kind of people who just are going to do breaking changes. Oh yeah, you'll figure it out. Don't worry. No, they're extremely thorough. So definitely appreciate that part of it.
Yeah, given that this is a breaking change, I think they've gone to great lengths to make sure that every question you might have gets answered. So they addressed what happens to people who have console access. They addressed what happens to people who are using this via the API. They have addressed managed policies versus custom policies. They've addressed, pretty much everything that you could think of. Dates, very explicit. Transition dates when it gets effective. Like new accounts cannot create IAM roles with the portal and the purchase order prefixes.
And
that was effective, I think, last week, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. Yeah, new accounts. Yeah, you can't, if you are creating a new account now, you automatically have to use the fine-grained policies.
Exactly.
And they came up with an affected policies tool, the affected policies console, which will help you figure out. And then they're also warning you if you have service control policies, you're not going to see them. You have to look in your organization page. So being extremely thorough, because otherwise you don't want a bunch of processes to break all at once. That's kind of the worst case. And so they want to mitigate that.
Exactly. So I think 4.5 is great on this, and I don't know if it simplifies.
Well, okay, that's a good question. I mean, it makes. Well, I guess this is the Einstein quote, right? You want everything to be as simple as possible, but not simpler than that. So it's obviously more complicated, but it's.
I think the change is what is hard. I think that the change might be hard for some folks. It's not a very drastic change, but it requires someone to go do something else that was not originally planned. So it's a little complex, but I think in the grand scheme of things, having everything at the least common denominator granularity of permissions and one way of doing things does make a lot of sense. And
so are we going with a neutral then?
I think I'd go with a neutral at this point.
Okay, look,
I don't feel comfortable saying this is absolutely simplifying.
Cool. All right, we've got neutral. And you pointed out, Rahul, that's too subtle. I wanted to have an effect of when it's neutral. And so my lighting shifted from blue to yellow, but it needs to be a bit bigger.
Yeah, actually, when we do this split screen version, I think a part of your background also gets kind of hidden.
Yeah, so now you can't see it.
Taken out. Yeah.
But here.
Now you can.
Yeah. So if the next article is good, we might get one of these.
Again, just a note before we go on to the next article, going forward, we'll probably do fewer reviews of specific items, but we want to go deeper into the content and make sure that you are getting the most value out of this conversation. So we intend to go deeper, more valuable content, rather than try and do too much. Again, as you're all aware, we are all sitting in front of the AWS Announcements fire hose, and keeping up with it is hard. So we want to make the most of it and get you only the most relevant stuff that you will want to care about. So like you can see, this week is all about efficiency around cost.
Yeah, it would be as fun as it would be to do a deep dive into every single one of them. I think that we would be forever in a backlog. We would never get out of it. And plus, some of them are only applicable to very specific and niche cases, whereas we want to focus on what's most important. And right now, that's cost.
Correct.
Well, let's jump into this one, which is SKU pricing rules for AWS Billing Conductor. There we go. So here is SKU pricing rules for AWS Billing Conductor. I'm going to post this into the chat.
And let's bring it up on screen as well.
Oh, thank you. Then we have gotten a tiny bit rusty, but that's all right.
Just start to the new year. So that's totally fine. Okay. So this one I'm actually pretty excited about. So the SKU pricing rules basically allow you to create custom pricing. And you can do this both for external customers, depending on, certain rules you create, or you can do it for internal chargeback as well. And I actually like this. One of the things that we've been very successful in doing in trying to create urgency and efficiency across the org is to use chargebacks as a mechanism of trying to bring about the right behavior. And it's funny that organizations, especially large organizations, are very, very difficult to change. But the one change that everyone reacts to is their budgets. Okay, if you don't have budget to do something, you are forced to act. And like I said earlier, finance has always had that control. And if you see most FinOps teams, they basically report to the CFO. So chargebacks are actually an amazing way to control or to try and accelerate the behavior your organization has towards efficiency. So, for example, for any behavior that we really wanted the engineering teams to follow, we would basically offer it for free in an internal charging scheme. Okay. So for example, if you wanted everyone to use Aurora databases instead of RDS databases that they were self-hosting, then we would say, if you use Aurora databases, it's completely free. If you used RDS databases, on the other hand, you would have to pay 3x.
This is the amount of 101, right? Is people respond to incentives.
Correct.
And you could make all the notes that you want to and the bulletins and all of that, but they say, okay, change the price, and people will respond.
Exactly. And it's been incredibly effective, because the one thing that gets all the stakeholders on the same page is their budget. Whether it be the CEO, whether it be the sales team, whether it be the CFO of the org, whether it be the head of engineering, you name it, everyone will get aligned to a particular number that's in the budget. So I love the idea of using chargeback. I know it rolls a lot of eyes when I tell people about the kind of chargebacks that we've kind of implemented internally to make big changes happen quickly, but it's effective at the end of the day, and it works.
At the end of the, and also, I guess, coming from like my background in econ and finance, right? It's people can roll their eyes, but if you don't use this, you have to use some other enforcement mechanism, which is probably worse.
Correct. I prefer to call them inducements of a special kind. But yeah, I mean, that it just boils down to that. These chargebacks are nothing but inducements that everyone can align with quickly.
Incentives. We'll call them incentives.
Okay, we'll incentivize them the right way to start leveraging the right or to have the right behavior from a cost and efficiency standpoint. But yeah, you want to dive into a little bit of the details?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of exactly what this means?
So I posted the getting started guide, because the announcement itself is it's pretty brief. It's just saying, it's basically saying this is what it is. A SKU is a particular combination of product usage and operation. So C5.2XL.EC2. That's a SKU. And the terminology that you hear a lot, if you're not in the billing conductor world, you hear it at like grocery stores, like stores, what's on a shelf. Each particular thing on the shelf, that's a SKU. And so this in the Getting Started guide, they go into a huge amount of detail. The idea is that you can make a customized pricing rule that's very specific to a particular usage of a very particular, like I said, a particular instance type running in a particular region. And you can make a rule that is flexible based on different pricing configurations. So if we look at the pricing configuration guide that they talk you through here, okay, so this is how you would make a SKU pricing rule. You would first identify a target SKU, to say it was a particular instance type or particular database configuration, and then you can configure the pricing. So it says first you create a pricing rule, and it gives you a set of basically scopes for that rule, and then you add that to a pricing plan. So the pricing plan is the overall set of rules that apply to a particular situation. So like you said, it could be an internal department, or it can be a customer if you're a solutions provider, or a set of customers. So it's interesting the way the rules work. If you look at this screenshot here from the pricing rule configuration, you can do things like discounts, which is a percentage-based discount or a markup. So if you're trying to disincentivize something, or this one is grayed out in this case, but you can do tiering.
Yep.
And then you can do the adjustments there.
Correct. I think this was designed by AWS primarily to address the marketplace scenario, where a lot of the customers have solutions in the marketplace and they want to design these billing schemes that they want to roll out across the marketplace, but it has an equally important place internally for chargebacks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is limited. I was looking at the type of rules you can make. You can't do combinatorial rules. For example, you can't say, and I was thinking about this because we ordered pizza last night. You can't say, use a 32X large and you get a T2 medium at half price, right? Whereas the local pizza shop might have, order an extra large and you get some chicken wings at half price or something like that. You can't do those kind of combinatorial rules, because really this is a domain-specific language for pricing. And if they made a system in which you could express those kind of rules, it would be a complexity and management nightmare. So
completely agree.
Can't.
Okay. Great. So for this particular announcement, I would actually give it, I'd again give it a 4.5. I think they've been very thorough in documenting this stuff, even though stuff is split between the guide and the announcement. I don't think they've thought too much about using this for internal chargeback use cases, but that's something that I think I'm going to spend some time trying to illustrate more examples of that in coming weeks, so that you can understand the kind of things that we do, or the kind of inducements that we can, or incentives. I've got to stop saying inducements, to kind of create certain kinds of incentives. One such one, which is very simple with the setup, is we like to keep all of our instances, especially non-prod instances, all in one region, rather than have them spread across any of the 26 different regions that exist on AWS, because that just causes an insane amount of complexity, and then it's really hard to figure out, how to get efficient. So instead, what we do is anything that is not launched in our US East 1 or US East 2, I think for most of it it's US East 1, but anything that's not launched in US East 1, we basically say there's a penalty. There's a markup that we attach to those instances, and sometimes they are pretty heavily penalized. And then if you continue to use US East 1, then you may get a certain discount on using those resources, because it allows us to leverage our savings plans more effectively, our reserved instances more effectively, as well as any convertible reserved instances that we might have had. So having all consolidated in one place really helps from a efficiency standpoint.
I think that would be really neat to have some examples of chargebacks to be able to shape behavior internally. And also, there's a cost to that complexity if you don't control it, right? It's easy to, I've done this on my personal instances, say, oh, I thought I turned everything off, and oh wait, I switched my tab on my management console, and in some other region I forgot that I had a running EC2 instance, and that could be, that's painful enough for one instance as an individual, but to have a group of instances, or a quick site dashboard that you forgot about, something like that adds up.
Completely agree. So this definitely simplifies people's lives, or at least people in FinOps will find this tool incredibly useful. And we'll have more on this topic soon.
Absolutely. Real examples of simplifying your cloud spend, we want to have a quick word from our sponsor, from Cloudfix, and that is the way to simplify your cloud spend and get that low hanging zero impact fixes that can really help you optimize your cost spend. Things like like turning on S3 intelligent tiering, getting your VPCs right. So let's hear a quick word from our sponsor.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right. Well, with that, let's jump into EC2 network performance metrics, and let's see how we're going to think about this from a cost perspective. All right, here comes. All right, contract, or contract is short for connection tracking. Now, this came out as I'm posting the link in the comments here.
Contract. Let's add that to the screen as well.
Thank you. Let's do that here. Contract came out as, post that right there. Contract. Sorry, here we go. Contract utilization metric. So the actual metric itself was brought about by the Elastic Network Adapter. And so this came out in 2020. And so the idea is you can track open connections on your actual networking stack, so on your kernel. So the idea is, say you have an EC2 instance and it's it's doing something with WebSockets or just standard TCP, it's running a web server. For every open connection, that actually takes up, there's a finite number of connections you can have, right? The kernel has to allocate resources, all of those things. And if you ever run a server, you know that eventually you can run out. And so with contract or connection tracking, the actual metric is how many connections do you have left on this instance?
Correct. I think this one is really neat from an optimization standpoint or an efficiency standpoint, because while it is great to figure out how you scale down and let go of a machine, one of the biggest savings that comes is in any efficiency that you can get on EC2 instances. After having looked at tens of thousands of accounts and hundreds of millions of dollars of spend, I think I can say with confidence that EC2 alone contributes to about 35 to 40% of organizations' AWS bills, right? So it is one of the largest, and in fact, the number one spend across the board. I have rarely seen an exception to that particular rule. And given that there are, there's that much spend associated with EC2, the idling instances that are just sitting there doing nothing, I think contribute to a big chunk of the wastage that's associated with the EC2 instances. This would really help you identify with a little more certainty what instances are truly idle. Historically, we've looked at CPU utilization, we've looked at network utilization, we've looked at memory utilization and seen if it's low enough where we believe it approximates to what just your operating system or basic application requires, then that's the best guess you could make. But if you know for a fact that there are no more connections left associated with that machine, then you can more confidently turn off those machines as idle machines. In fact, it reminds me of the very first cost optimization tool that I wrote and this is back in 2007, where there was no AWS console, or there was barely an AWS console. There were no IAM roles or anything like that. So we had a pseudo console that everyone had to use, which had our version of IAM built into it so that they could get access only to specific things. But one of the things that we did was we would shut down machines beyond the 8 hours that they allocated as their working hours. And so when somebody was done with the machine, we'd automatically shut it off, because you save on 66% of your cost by just turning off a machine. And that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal on literally your number one spend.
Yeah, just like you wouldn't leave your lights on in your office or leave the heating or the air conditioning on when you're not there. Why would you leave the actual instances up when it takes a little bit of automation to not? But you want to make sure you have the right metrics to say, is this instance truly busy or not? And with a contract, you can say, is it truly busy, right? And then you can put a value on that busyness, right? Like if it's one connection left out of potentially hundreds, well, that depending on the application will tell you how much you value that one connection, right? If it's the storing some state of a shopping cart, maybe that's okay. If some customer loses something that they added to their shopping cart and has to add it again, right? That's possible. But if it's an analytics job that has to finish, then yeah, you'd want to let that terminate.
Correct. So I think this simplifies and really helps with the efficiencies tremendously. So I'd give this a 4.5 again. And they've been really good at explaining what the metric is, how you would use it. Pretty straightforward on that front. And like I said, identifying idle instances, identifying instances that can be either taken out of your auto scaling groups and stuff like that. This makes life really, really simple.
Yeah, absolutely. It's simple. All right, so we've got a pretty good showing from AWS today. 4.5 stars across the board, or 4.5 clouds across the board, and no complexity alerts. Although the billing conductor, it's complexity that's needed. So it's hard to say. All right. Well, should we jump into our last article of the day? That's going to be this. Our last article of the day is about Elasticache.
Yep.
Okay. I will queue up the. Okay, Elasticache for Redis data tiering, now available in the AWS Europe Stockholm region. So, what is Redis data tiering? If we look at data tiering in the first sentence of the article, a lower cost way to scale your clusters up to hundreds of terabytes of capacity, and in this case, it's for the Europe Stockholm, but obviously it's not unique to that region. Data tiering provides a new price performance option for Redis workloads by utilizing lower cost SSDs in each cluster, in addition to storing data in memory. And this is interesting. Ideal for workloads that access up to 20% of their overall data set regularly.
Which I think would be a large portion of folks that are using Elasticache for Redis in particular. And the thing is that this is not a new announcement. This has existed for a while. Just the fact that it's now available in the Stockholm region just brought it up on the top of the thing, and I wanted to share it with everyone. This is actually really neat. For most use cases, you're going to be accessing only the most recent data that you have. I mean, that's what the caches are for, right? It's most frequently used queries showing up over and over again. For most scenarios, it's the most recent, it's the most relevant and recent data. So, and it's likely to be less than 20% of your overall data set. This is not going to be used for big aggregations and stuff like that you're going to have to do on the fly. This is just literally, reading data that was written a short while ago. So this tier sounds pretty awesome. And it's probably going to save you a ton of money just by, switching over to this lower. It's almost like intelligent tiering for S3, just that it doesn't happen automatically. You have to pick the specific tier that you want your Redis or Elasticache Redis one with. But yeah, this is plenty for, I'd say, 70 to 80% of use cases out there.
It's really interesting looking at the they give some good numbers of this for the. This is a 500 byte string. You can expect an additional 300 microsecond latency on average. An additional 300 microseconds for requests stored to data on SSD versus data in memory. So it's really good kind of thinking these different orders of magnitude for data access.
Correct.
I remember my dad told me, he said, okay, the processor cache is like having something in your hand, and then RAM is like having something in your pocket, and then your hard disk, or I guess in the case of an SSD, it's like having something in your toolbox, and if you have an HDD, it's like having something on the moon. It's a lot. I think we don't appreciate how much memory access has changed since the days of spinning hard disks. So having the difference between solid state RAM versus a solid state NVMe disk that's going over the PCI bus. That's great. They can quantify that, about 300 microseconds of additional latency. And that seems like a pretty good trade-off if you're using Redis to say most of your data, the data that you're going to use the most, is still going to be in RAM, but then it can slowly shift it over to an NVMe-based storage, which is most likely good enough for that application.
Correct. And we just got, I'm going to put this up over here.
Oh, cool.
That's pretty neat. Thanks for joining the show, Jeff. And so this one is actually really neat. What I'm going to be very interested in diving into this to see is this new tier, which is probably going to be applicable for like 70 to 80% of the use cases. Is this going to be a default option? I'm guessing not. You have to explicitly go in and turn this into you have to explicitly go choose this as your storage tier. It's not going to be there by default. Well, and I don't think most people will realize
GPT-2 are still the defaults.
GP2 is still the default for EC2 instances, even though GP3 has been out for almost 2.5 years now, or a little over 2 years. So I think that's going to make it a little hard. Like by default, you're going to be, most folks are not going to know this. Most folks are not going to understand that this sub-millisecond latency trade-off that they are making over here is going to cost them a little bit more. Instead, it could just be made easier by making that the default. That would have gone a really long way in simplifying the lives of the users, because most people don't end up explicitly selecting the storage. It's just whatever's defaults, go with it and move on. So I think that's more of an implementation detail. I think that I would love to change across the board. When something is better as default, it should be changed to the default in my view, especially when it applies to a vast majority of users of AWS, because no one bothers to read through every little detail. Yes, they should. That's a good stance to have, but the reality is that people don't. And so in the interest of customers, I think the default option should be the best option.
No, I agree. But I can respect the stance of not making breaking changes, and we have an example of that as well.
Yes.
I think it is interesting. We're seeing this data distribution, right? The 20%. This is the another example of the so-called Pareto rule.
Yep.
The Microsoft. This is one from Wikipedia on the Pareto rule. Where top 20% of bugs are responsible for 80% of the crashes. Similar, the top 20% of your data is probably what's going to be used 80% of the time.
Yep.
Lots of other. This distribution comes up a lot in nature. So the code called 80-20 rule, or in other words, the Pareto rule.
Yep.
Well,
awesome. So we didn't give a rating on this one, right? So in terms of the blog post and the details, I think I'd give this a 4. And I'd say definitely simplifies. It goes a long way in getting efficiencies. We will have to dig into a little bit deeper on this to see how easy it is to switch over to another tier. Like, do we need to take an EBS snapshot, launch it as a new volume type on the new instance and stuff like that? So we'll work out the logistics and get you more details on that. But a simpler tier that is cheaper, more and almost as efficient, where the trade-offs aren't big to make. It's still sub-millisecond difference in access times, and this is read times. You're getting it into memory. I think it's totally worth the trade-off for most scenarios. And yeah, I love the announcement.
And I wonder if this is that we're going to expect other types of announcements like this. I mean, I think S3 Intelligent Tiering pioneered it, and other ways of being able to, well, basically bring the customer's savings on this whole memory. I mean, memory is the bottleneck in terms of computing expense. If you're a gamer and you want to build a computer, you're going to find that out. Memory is the bottleneck. And so being able to say, here's a trade-off that you can make of performance versus latency. And do you want to make it? And you probably don't need everything in memory. You probably need 20%. So
Correct.
Being able to then capitalize on that difference and save on that, that's pretty neat. I'm sure we'll see this same pattern pop up in other AWS managed services.
Agreed. And I'd definitely say this should be a simplifies.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, if it's something you can turn on, save money, almost no impact in the majority of use cases. Yeah, sounds good to us.
Great. So we've got 4 announcements that are very cost and efficiency centric. And again, we've had a huge ton of announcements that have come in since our last episode. So we are still in catch-up mode, trying to get through all of those announcements. We'll continue to give you the most relevant ones for you. So please drop us a note. Please reach out to us and give us your feedback. We'd love to know what interests you the most and topics that we can bring to you. Anything else, Steven, before we sign off?
Oh, that was great. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And we'll see you next week. And I think that'll be interesting. I think part of what we'll do next week is just digest a whole month's worth of announcements and look at the different ways that we can use those announcements to help save on our cloud spend and keep the businesses going.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.